Welcome everybody. I'm Tracy Browning of Constantine Quilts here in rural South Australia, and I'm your machine quilting specialist here. I've been doing this for 22 years now, and I love getting new products and fantastic inspirational books and DVDs in just to help you out so that you can continue learning and upskilling in your passion of machine quilting. And today I'd like to introduce you to Teri Lucas, who is currently, has just moved to Texas in the USA. And she's released a new book that I've just got in, which really appealed to me when I first saw it. I thought, I've got to have this book just so that everybody else can participate and learn as well. And it was fate, I believe, but we happened to meet online, and this is the result. So welcome, Teri.
Thank you, Tracy. It's really nice to be here with you.
We're having this little get together this morning. It's morning for me in Australia, and it's evening for Teri over there in Texas. We just want to have a get to know you, Teri. So when did you first fall in love with the art of quilting?
Oh, probably about 27 years ago. It sort of started on a lark. My husband told me one day that I needed a hobby, and quilting happened to inspire me because I actually weirdly like geometry. It just sort of progressed from there, from being something I did here and there to something I did all weekend, every weekend, to something that I sort of live and breathe.
The math that really appealed to you, but did you have a favorite genre?
You know what? I actually don't. There are things in each genre that I really like. Like in the traditional stuff, I love how simple and clean the patterns are. In the modern movement, I love how there is this really cool design aesthetic in in the art quilt. I love how quilters take the things that are living inside their head and get them out so that we get to share in the beauty and joy of and their passion and in what they're doing. I love the skill of hand quilters and applicators. And I also, when I started machine quilting, I had no idea that this is actually what I would end up doing and teaching, and just loving quite so deeply.
I hear that so much among quilters that are turned into teachers. The passion to share is just beautiful in this industry. We certainly appreciate those that choose to go in this direction because it helps the rest of us. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you have, was there anyone that was your biggest inspiration for any of your quilts, or is there what's behind it all?
There are a lot of people who have influenced me over the years. Some are well known, like Alex Anderson and Paula Reed and Karen McTavish, Ginny Beyer, Carol Breyer Fallert, all of those. But then there are some folks locally who aren't on the national stage. Elizabeth Rosenberg and Renee Valdez and a number of quilters, Marian Ciccatelli, and people who I was in my local guild with, and they were the folks. My local guild members were the folks who, when I would go to guild meetings, they would say things like, "Are you sure you really want to do that?" Or because with one of my quilts, I'd finished all the blocks, and once the blocks were done, I was just going to add really wide borders and an orange fabric and call it done. And they're like, "No, that's not what this quilt wants." And so a couple of the guild members sat on the floor with my quilt on the floor and actually just were laying out blocks so that I could get a vision of what they were seeing. And it was amazing how not only did I get the width of the quilt that I wanted.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. And I think being involved in a guild is invaluable, to have the expertise and the the second, the third, the fourth eye on your work that can give you a different perspective as well as challenge you. I certainly learned a lot from my first guild, and I'm going to assume that you've over time you've entered quite a few quilt shows with your quilts.
I actually have entered quilts in shows back a long time ago, and I actually don't even remember the time at this point. I entered 2 quilts in a show one year, just to get them judged and sort of see like which path that I actually wanted to take. Did I want to continue hand quilting, or did I want to continue machine quilting? And I have fairly good hand quilting stitch. And so I had a hand quilted, a machine quilted, and the machine quilted quilt came so close to qualifying for a ribbon. Like, I was so close. I'm like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And the quilting was actually rather simple, some stitch in the ditch and a little bit of other stuff. But it was that, and probably a number of other things that tipped me towards the machine quilting side. I actually have won a couple of ribbons. The entering of those 2 quilts, uh, the hand quilted one didn't qualify for any kind of thing. The machine quilted one was so close to winning a 3rd place ribbon, that it sort of sent me down the direction of pursuing machine quilting a little bit more, which allowed me to not so much set aside the hand quilting, but it gave me a direction in which to pursue. And down the road, you had mentioned unpicking quilts, and I will send you this image because it is rather interesting. The first really strongly whole cloth quilt that I did is called Twilight in the Bronx. And when I quilted that quilt, I took a piece of Kona cotton and drew a lone star on it. And it's I got about 2/3 of the way quilting that. Each one of the star sections was quilted in yellow, purple, and green. And then around the entire perimeter of all of that, I quilted it. So this was black Kona cotton, and I quilted it in black cotton. And one of my guild members said to me, she came over and sat next to me, and she goes, "Teri, you're hiding your quilting," because I had done really intense quilting around the surface. So I went home and did what every normal quilter does, and I picked out most of that quilting.
Oh goodness, I think I would have just started again with a fresh piece of fabric.
Yes, but I'm not normal.
Oh, that's dedication. And well, we might have to thank that quilt show for pushing you in the direction of machine quilting, because, of course, that led into you teaching. Is that correct?
Yes. It was actually the Twilight in the Bronx that led me into teaching. That, and one of my guild members saying, "Hey, Teri, why aren't you teaching?" So I started teaching in my local quilt shops, and then started teaching nationally within about a year of that. I know, you know what? I know quilting teachers. We all have those students who, in our classes, these are the students that we look for, and it is an amazing moment because we never know where it's coming from, but somebody will just relax into the quilting, and we see their shoulders relax, we see their breathing even out, we see them focusing on what's under the needle and just kind of calmly, gently pursuing whatever stitching motif is, whatever motif they're stitching.
Mm.
And we just see this incredible change. We're like, yes, this is it. This is that moment. Like everything's just sort of evened out.
Yeah, no, it is a beautiful sight to see when that light bulb goes off, and the smile, just that little smile on their face, shows me that they're enjoying it thoroughly and they're just so in the zone.
Yeah.
And even better
Yeah.
is when I see a finished quilt and they're so proud of it, and as is their family and their peers. And you
Yeah.
think, yeah, I had a tiny bit to play in that, but it's the best feeling in the world, isn't it?
Oh,
So you
absolutely.
said you taught locally
Absolutely.
and nationally. Have you taught internationally?
No, not yet. I am just getting to a point where I could probably teach nationally, in part because I actually have a book out now. I haven't won the big ribbons. Like, I haven't won Houston or Paducah or anything along that line. So while my skill level is good enough, there wouldn't have been enough of a draw to have me teach internationally.
And at the moment, of course, we're not going anywhere. We can't get anybody into Australia, and
No.
no, and you'd never get home either, even if you did manage to get in. So whilst
No.
we're all locked down, we'll be doing wonderful little get-togethers like we are right now online. So
Exactly.
that will make it be the new normal, is doing everything online. So tell us a little bit more on how the
Mhm.
book came about.
This would have been my second book. I had to give up a book a couple of years ago just because of we all have life circumstances sometimes and they're a little overwhelming. And I pitched another book in between that and this, and then I started playing, kind of tapping into a couple of things. And C&T, this was sort of a collaboration between me and C&T, where they were saying, we'd like you to write a book about the way that you quilt. And I needed to figure out what was so different about what I do. I started really looking at my quilts and trying to hear what the feedback that I was getting from them, and realized that what I do with thread is not what most people do with thread. It was them kind of asking a whole lot of questions and me responding to it, and that led me to go ahead and put out an outline. I started stitching what I was calling at the color wheels, where I was taking a color run of like anywhere from 5 to 7 or 9 threads, just from what I had in my thread stand, and doing like 7 to 9 reds and oranges and yellows, and going through the entire color spectrum and looking for colors that were brighter and had more depth to them, and started creating these color wheels to show machine quilting motifs. But what I was actually discovering was that it's actually a great way to teach people how to use color. So it took a little while to for me to kind of figure all of that out, and got the basic outline approved, and went forward with the writing and with the quilting. Creating each one of the color wheels, at first I made the decision that for most of the color wheels I would use the same thread from color wheel to color wheel. So I was making a commitment to a certain run of colors, and I think it's 5 or 6 of each color that I chose. And then I went to one of my favorite solid companies, Michael Miller, and said, okay, here's here's what I'm doing, here's what I need. I gave them a list, and when I got the fabric in, I picked a red, a yellow, and again running through the color, and then decided that I would also add a white, a black, a gray, and a brown. Shine Your Light is actually very representative of what I do with color and thread. Um, Shine Your Light was created right about the time that I actually had to give up my first book. It was shortly after Yvonne Porcello, who is one of the founders of Studio Art Quilt Associates, passed away, and Pokey Bolton, who was a very good friend, and I think Yvonne was a mentor of hers, put out a call for entries, because one of Yvonne's mottos, or one of her sayings, was "Live your brightest life." And I was thinking about that, and as especially because it was a really rough moment. The quilt shop that I was working in that had been open for 20 something years was in the process of closing. And I had just had to give up my book, and I was just so physically tired at this point that going into my sewing room and quilting was actually pretty difficult. There were times when I would go stand at the door and go, okay, nope, not today. Today's not the day I can do this. And so I managed to create Shine Your Light, which, along with Moon Over Manhattan, Twilight in the Bronx, and a number of other things that I've done over the last few years, uses thread to create something of an image. Moon Over Manhattan kind of creates a moon shape, the star kind of behind the moon, and Twilight in the Bronx is more of the, more of that star in the sky, and it's kind of it kind of represents space and the depth of space and the area where I was living and all of that. But Shine Your Light kind of took a little bit of a different turn because it was a moment where I got to honor somebody who is very important in our quilting. She's one of our quilting mothers, and the centerpiece of this is that candle, and the entire flame, including the black and the blue that you see on screen, is quilted in metallic. It was a little scary stitching that because I developed a little bit of a bubble at some point, and I'm like, oh, am I going to be able to get this out? And so it was sort of, it was one of those kind of anxious moments. And the only thing that I drew on this quilt was kind of the outline of the candle, just to see, partly for placement, but
Mm-hmm.
right over where the flame is, there was something that actually, I was looking at this snow dyed piece of Robert Kaufman Radiance, and that actually looked like a flame to me. So that was the entire impetus for the quilt. But
Mm-hmm.
over the surface of the quilt, I used James Sassaman's So Sassy thread, which is a 12 weight thread. So it's really a very
Really quilting.
present thread in your quilt. And I also used kimono silk, which is a 100 weight silk thread. So it's very fine. And then, a variety of other threads. And there are a couple of spots on there that really reflect thread can play with you. Just to the left of the candle, there's this whole area where I did loops, and then behind it, or in between some of the spaces, I used a dark silk thread to do very tiny pebble work. And it's interesting because it is that very tiny pebble work which has more of a presence in there because of how dense the stitching is, where
Mm-hmm.
that 12 weight thread next to it, sort of, it's there, but because of the color of it, it sort of kind of blends into the background, and the darker silk densely stitched thread, it is more present. And that actually reflects a little bit about, like, with each one of the color wheels that I did, some of the stitching was very dense, and so what you see is the thread color, and then some of the stitching was much more open. So you see some of the much more of the background color.
Mm-hmm.
And with each color wheel, it was interesting to see how certain threads stood out and became very present, and others went into the background. And some of that depended on their weight, and some of that just depended on the background and how close the color was to the background.
Yeah, right. So I guess that leads me into, I'm thinking I'm getting an idea that you don't use a particular brand, you use anything that you can get your hands on. Have you got a favorite brand of thread?
I tend towards Superior, only because I've spent, over the years, I invested kind of heavily in Superior. But I will use Glide, I will use Wonderfill. I started using Wonderfill when a friend of mine explained to me why she uses the bobbin thread, the 60
Hmm.
weight polyester in the bobbin, and it was this light bulb moment because I'd been matching threads, using the same thing top and bobbin, and my quilts were always a little wonky. And in changing from using whatever I was using on the top to using a much finer thread in the bobbin, my quilts started laying flatter. And as some of the threads came out on the market, I've started using a 100 weight polyester in the bobbin, in part because it's strong,
Mm.
and I can guarantee that my quilt's going to lay flat later on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Wonderfill's Invisifill, the 100 weight. Superior's got their micro quilter, which is virtually exactly the same. And that's pretty much all I use exclusively in the bobbin
Mhm.
these days, unless there's something really special that I need a thread to be a secondary design on the back, and then I will play a little bit more with something else. But no, I love my threads. I think I have more thread than I have fabric now, which is
I,
really scary if you could see how many tubs of threads I've got.
I am right there with you, and you being a long arm quilter, I am certain that you have way more thread than I do.
Oh, when I decide that I like a particular a thread brand or weight, I
Hmm.
don't just stop at buying a couple of cones. I tend to get the whole range.
Yeah, I think that's actually that's a pretty good thing to do, because then you're pretty well guaranteed that whatever you're working on, you'll have that color that will make sense with the quilt.
And I use the excuse that I'm out in the country and I don't have any shops close by, and I certainly don't have shops that stock ranges of threads. So I am the shop and I need it right now. I can't wait for it to
See,
come from. So
that makes
that's how I look at it. But every brand, I will give them all a go, and they all have slightly different qualities, which will give you
total
slightly different results.
sense.
Ah, here's Moon Over Manhattan. Lovely.
This is the bottom part of really and then there's a little hint of my bubbly personality where I pulled out the red, the orange, and the yellow in that lower corner. It's one of my favorite quilts.
I love pictures.
Let me see. Okay, so this is some of my thread stash,
Mm.
which needs serious organizing. One of the things that I do, and that I encourage quilters to do, is to doodle. I reference it a little bit in the book, and I encourage quilters to do it with both their dominant and non-dominant hands, because whether we're quilting on a home sewing machine or one of the sit-down long arms or a long arm itself, where we're guiding things, we're using both hands to do the quilting. So if we doodle with both our right and left hand, we get a feel for how either the quilt will be moving underneath our hands, or how we'll be guiding the thread over the surface of the quilt. And it actually makes a dynamic difference over time, because we're practicing without feeling like we're going to ruin something, which is what most of us as quilters think. Oh, if I do something really crazy on this, that I just won't be if it's bad, I just won't be able to pick it out. um, but doodling helps an awful lot. The more I doodled, the more I saw my quilting improve
Improve.
over
Definitely.
a period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, any new design, yeah, that I've sort of come up with, it's in my head, I will definitely, in fact, on the back of a customer work order, if I'm doing a customer quilt, you'll see all the doodle of a different background fill that I'm trying to incorporate. And that I can refer to every time to keep myself on track when I get quilting
Hmm.
until I'm right into it. So, yep, doodling definitely is the best way that you can improve your quilting. That
Hmm.
hand-eye coordination, that memory, the muscle memory that it creates, so you
Hmm.
can get from one side to the other without having to take the pen off the paper, is definitely a handy skill and something to get into practice using.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's also
Look,
a good way to use color.
yes, absolutely. I used to struggle a lot with colour. It's only by letting go of the fear and trying new things together. I now
Mhm.
will lay out so many threads over a quilt with a customer now, and I can push them into a slightly different direction, and they're usually very, very pleased with, nobody ever thinks to put lime green over a quilt, and it's usually stunning.
I know, right? I
I've
love
scanned a
lime
few
green.
with neon coloured threads, but I have talked a couple into it, and they've just come out so good.
Right, 'cause it's either a good contrast or a really good complement to
Yes.
whatever we're working on.
Look, Terry, it's been great talking to you today and lovely
Thank
to
you.
meet you.
To me too.
Yes. Do you have future books in the plan? Are you working on anything new?
I would like I would like to, but I think I need to focus on selling this one and doing some teaching with this one before I delve into another one. There are some things that are going on in my head that I want to explore. So I think there will be something coming, but I don't know what or when.
Wonderful, wonderful. It'll be great to see how this one gets out there and where you can grow. More than likely, I'll bet in the next 12 months, as you're teaching these techniques and promoting this first book, it's usually the students that tell us what they want and push you in the
Mhm.
direction that they need to go in. So and you can use your expertise to get it down on paper and be able to share that knowledge with a lot more people, which will be wonderful.
Yeah,
And I hope you enjoy your new
absolutely.
home when you get to finally move in.
Thank thank you, me too. We're closing this weekend, and I am just so excited to be actually, moving from a hotel room.
Oh, I would be too.